When I was younger, Steel was my single favorite type, and I imagine that this isn't an unpopular opinion. The idea of magical monsters made of metal is, I think, inherently appealing, but also the way that Steel works in the game is just really neat. It is the single most defensive type, with tons of resistances, more than any other type by far, and only a couple weaknesses. As someone who preferred a defensive playstyle in competitive for many years, Steel was basically everything I could ask for. Many of the best Pokemon of all time are Steel type. Many of the best Pokemon right now are Steel type. But none of this is especially relevant, because today I want to find out what is the worst Steel type Pokemon. As a reminder, I'm only talking about these Pokemon competitively. I'm not talking about their worth as Pokemon or their design or anything like that. I'm strictly talking about competitive results over the years. And I will only be talking about the official competitive format rather than any of the other ways you can play Pokemon. There is a theme among the Pokemon that are on this list, I noticed, and that is many of them are very defensive Pokemon without much to do. This is perhaps counterintuitive in a way. So you would think that a defensive Steel type, which wants to be defensive, would play to the type as a whole. And that is true in general. Many of the best Steel type Pokemon are good in part because they're so hard to remove. However, being hard to remove isn't a virtue on its own. You need to be able to do something back. So many of the Pokemon we're going to talk about today do excel at sticking around, they just don't really excel at what comes after that. Anyway, this isn't actually the case for the first Pokemon on our list. Coming in at number 10, Perrserker. I really like Perrserker. I think the design is cool, and I think the fact that they gave a new evolution to Meowth that has its own distinct identity is also pretty neat, even though it's not as iconic as regular Persian or even Alolan Persian in my opinion. That being said, what I really like about Perrserker is its ability Steely Spirit. Steely Spirit is on paper really good. It gives a 50% power boost to all Steel type moves used by your side of the field. A 50% damage boost is pretty nuts, to be clear. That's effectively the choice band or choice specs item, and those items are really good and come with a major drawback. Perrserker also has a couple really important supporting moves, such as Fake Out, one of the moves synonymous with competitive play at this point, and Helping Hand, which can give another 50% damage boost to a partner. I would not say that Perrserker is a bad Pokemon, but it does have some weaknesses holding it back. The stats are not very good. The defense stat is high, but its special defense stat is quite low, and the HP stat is only like okay at best. And all of this combines to make Perrserker feel like a little bit squishier than you would expect for a Steel type Pokemon that's also pretty slow. The attack stat is totally usable given its ability, but it's not going to be doing like so much damage on its own. I would say the stats aren't really the main problem. The main problem is a little bit more conceptual when it comes to Perrserker, and that's the fact that you don't really want to overlap Steel typing on your team. Having two different Steel types means that you're going to be overlapping a lot of the same weaknesses, especially given that Perrserker is a pure Steel type Pokemon, so it has all of the weaknesses of Steel by default. In theory, Perrserker could be quite strong, and I actually am going to go so far as to say that I think it's a little bit underexplored. I just checked to see if it even was in Scarlet and Violet, and it was added in the DLC, and in theory, being able to pair Perrserker with Gholdengo seems like a really good synergy, Gholdengo having a powerful spread move that hits both opponents, and is also Steel type, meaning it gets boosted by Steely Spirit. And Perrserker was in Scarlet and Violet, but it didn't see any use. I think it's a Pokemon that's really difficult to use and makes team building really awkward, but I do think it's a Pokemon with future potential that hasn't been fully realized. It's also one of the few Pokemon on our list that actually has a result. Perrserker has one recorded result in February of 2020, where it placed 62nd at the Oceania International Championships. Funnily enough, this Perrserker was not paired with another Steel type Pokemon, so Steely Spirit was simply used to boost Perrserker itself. I think it's a fun Pokemon, and although it is one of the worst Steel type Pokemon, that's more a testament to how good Steel is as a type overall rather than Perrserker being weak. Okay, coming in at number 9 is Forretress. Back when I used to play single battles, Forretress was pretty exceptional. Thanks to its immense physical bulk and only one weakness, you could often just lead it and use it to set up multiple levels of entry hazards like Stealth Rocks, Toxic Spikes, and Spikes. I think it's a very strong Pokemon in single battles, or at least it was back in like Generation 4 and Generation 5. In the official competitive format, Forretress has a harder time actually doing stuff. It is immensely physically bulky, but this is less impressive in double battles when your opponent has two Pokemon on the field, because the odds of them having at least one special attacker are a lot higher, meaning it's harder for Forretress to just sit in the field and be unkillable. Forretress also has pretty mediocre special bulk, meaning that like it's not good if it's facing down a special attacker. I say mediocre, it's not that bad. It's actually just bad in comparison to its massive physical bulk, which at some points were one of the highest in the game. In terms of the types you compare with Bug, Steel is the single best one, so I would say that Forretress has pretty good typing. Its abilities are okay. Sturdy will allow it to survive any hit from full HP, which can be useful if you're worried about fire moves, which it does have a quadruple weakness to. It also gets Overcoat, which makes it immune to Spore and Rage Powder, which are moves that are present in most competitive formats. The issue with Forretress, of course, is the fact that actually contributing to battle is really difficult for it. It's very, very slow, meaning it'll be moving after most other Pokemon attack, and while it can use moves like Gyro Ball to take advantage of its low speed stat, that's kind of it. Like, it doesn't get that many moves that really want it to be slow. I guess Volt Switch is another one you could argue, but for the most part, you'd rather have it be fast and use moves like Struggle Bug and Rock Tomb, I guess, even those aren't very great. The issue is really just its move pool and its lack of offensive stats. Forretress's stats entirely gear it towards being bulky and like hard to remove, and while that is really good in theory, it's only good if you can actually do something back. With a base 90 attack stat and a base 60 special attack stat and no like super high power moves that it can use, aside from Explosion, which, you know, come on, there just isn't that much for Forretress to do. That being said, Forretress does have an official result, and it's actually not a bad one either. Forretress placed 30th at Merida Regionals in 2025. This is a format where you were allowed to have one restricted Pokemon on your team, like Miraidon or Calyrex or Groudon. Forretress on this team used an unusual moveset. It used actually Iron Defense and Body Press with Rest and Sleep Talk, and a Terra type of Ghost. It was paired with Kyogre to threaten the Fire type Pokemon, as well as Landorus and Carnage, presumably to threaten Miraidon and Koraidon in some sense. Forretress looks a little bit out of place on this team because it's actually like super offensive. It's a Tailwind team with Sarina, Tornadus, and Urshifu, and it seems very much to me like it's a team that just wants to run over the opponent with damage before they can react using powerful moves like Water Spout and Surging Strikes. So why is Forretress on this team? My guess is that in these matchups, Forretress would use Iron Defense to make itself basically untouchable on the physical side. It could use Body Press to take advantage of its heightened defense stat, doing decent damage over time. And if its health ever got too low, it could use Rest and then Sleep Talk while it was asleep to continue doing damage and setting up even while it was asleep. This Forretress also held the Rocky Helmet item, meaning if you did only have physical attackers and that was your only way through it, you'd have to attack Forretress directly and take a bunch of recoil. This is especially true for Urshifu, Rapid Strike, who would hit 3 times and would crit ignoring the defense boosts, but then would have to take 3 different instances of Rocky Helmet damage. I don't know for sure if this is the reasoning behind this Forretress, but based on the team, that's my guess. And I think it is cool that a Pokemon like Forretress is able to keep up in a format where there were such high-powered Pokemon. If you're enjoying this video, please make sure to check and see if you are subscribed. This is a whole series, so if you're liking this one, presumably you're gonna like future ones as well. I hope that the quality only gets better over time, and you don't want YouTube to not show you when there's a new video just because it's having a bad day or whatever. Anyway, coming in number 8 is Bastiodon, and what I will say about Bastiodon is that there are people who love this Pokemon. I actually don't fully understand what was happening, but I remember at some point during Scarlet and Violet, there was talk of the Bastiodon Mafia. I don't know what this means, to be fully transparent. I don't even know how to go about figuring it out. I just feel like I heard whispers for like a period of like 4 months, maybe longer, 6 months. And I assume it's because people like Bastiodon, which is a little bit strange, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, Bastiodon. So Bastiodon is a Steel and Rock type Pokemon, and already right out of the gates, this is the biggest issue with Bastiodon. Steel and Rock is an abysmal type combination, giving you 2 quadruple weaknesses to Ground and Fighting, both of which are almost always common types in the official competitive format. It's also weak to Water, which is never a good type to be weak to because it's one of the most popular types always, and even your numerous resistances won't offset all these weaknesses. Stat-wise, Bastiodon is a little bit like a more balanced Forretress. It is incredibly physically bulky and also has good special defense, not quite as high, but still totally exceptional. Although it is true that it has a very low base HP stat, making these high defensive numbers like a little bit less impactful, still very bulky nonetheless. It's even slower than Forretress, but it's also significantly weaker on both the attack and special attack stats. It has some of the worst offensive stats of any Pokemon. It's clearly geared towards being this incredible defensive Pokemon, but the issue is that with all the weaknesses in its typing, or I should say the severity of the weaknesses with its typing, it doesn't actually get to feel as bulky as it actually is, meaning it has fewer turns in the field than you would like, and that's a problem because it doesn't have the offenses to do anything quickly when it comes to battle. That being said, it was a great target for terrestrialization in theory because you could override its terrible defensive typing. This doesn't solve the offensive problem, but it does mitigate the defensive problem, right? And Bastiodon actually has something that it can do. Just like Forretress, it learns Body Press, meaning you can actually use its huge physical defense stat offensively. Bastiodon also gets a really important supporting move called Wide Guard, which is limited in distribution, like not as many Pokemon get it as you would like, though there are still a fair few that get it, and is one of the best moves, especially when restricted Pokemon are around. Its abilities are okay. It also gets Sturdy, which can help protect it against a one-hit KO from a powerful, super effective, most likely attack, and it gets Soundproof, which helps against certain moves like Hyper Voice and Perish Song, though those moves aren't always especially common. Bastiodon is actually the only Pokemon on our list with 2 recorded results. It got 76th place in January of 2025 at San Antonio Regionals. It followed this performance up with a 33rd placement 2 months later on March 8th, 2025 at Fortaleza Regionals. I am so sorry if I've butchered that pronunciation. These results are from 2 different players, though the 6 Pokemon on their teams are identical. This was also in the single restricted format, just like we talked about with Forretress. And I'm guessing that Bastiodon filled a similar role here, although it may have been a little bit more versatile than Forretress was. In addition to Iron Defense and Body Press, allowing it to be a meaningful physical threat, especially against Pokemon like Calyrex Ice Rider, both Bastiodons use the moves Wide Guard for team support and Foul Play as well. The combination of Wide Guard and Foul Play allow Bastiodon to really threaten Calyrex Shadow Rider, as you naturally resist its psychic moves, can use Wide Guard to stop its ghost type moves, and can use Foul Play to threaten a one-hit KO if they don't terrestrialize. In a terrestrialization format, I think that Bastiodon is a lot better than Forretress, but given that terrestrialization has only been in Scarlet and Violet and will eventually be in Pokemon Champions, I felt like it was worth taking into consideration that Forretress has just like way better typing across the board. What I will say about it though is that I think it's more likely that going forward we see Bastiodon before we see another Forretress. Okay, that was the last Pokemon on our list with a recorded result. Every other Pokemon, there's no recorded instance of them being used in the official competitive format, though of course the data from before Sword and Shield is a bit lacking sometimes. Not relevant here though, because the number 7 Pokemon on our list is a Pokemon introduced in Scarlet and Violet, Revavroom. Despite not having any results, I would not say that Revavroom is a bad Pokemon. As a Steel and Poison type Pokemon, it's one of the few Pokemon in the game that has a quadruple resistance to Fairy, which is pretty valuable because Fairy type Pokemon are quite strong. Its stats are also a lot better than any of the Pokemon we've talked about thus far. It has a totally usable speed stat, respectable bulk, although I wouldn't say it's great, and a usable attack stat as well. The issue is really the typing. Steel and Poison typing is awkward for a couple of reasons. Not only do you have a quadruple weakness to ground, but you're also weak to fire as well. Having only 2 weaknesses is really good, but having one of those weaknesses be a quadruple weakness to a type that is very common is a bit concerning at the very least. The other issue with Revavroom's typing is its offensive matchups. Neither Steel or Poison type Pokemon are able to hit opposing Steel types, making it very easy for Revavroom to feel awkward. Poison is also just not a type that you often want to use offensively. The main use case is for Fairy type Pokemon, but if you're a Steel type, you're already doing that. So it makes the typing a bit redundant, as both Steel and Poison are types that you want on your team, like for the resistances, especially for the resistance to Fairy. So putting them together kind of, yeah, it just makes it redundant. That being said, Revavroom has a number of good moves. It gets the signature move Spin Out. I think this is a signature. Hold please. Yep, Spin Out is a signature move. It has a very high base power and drops Revavroom's speed by 2 stages, meaning you could use it in conjunction with like a Trick Room team. Maybe give Revavroom a Choice Scarf and then have this as an option so you can use it both in and out of Trick Room. It gets the supporting move, Parting Shot. It actually gets good coverage moves as well, like it gets Overheat, it gets High Horsepower, it gets Temper Flare. I think those are most of the notable ones. It gets both Poison Jab and Gunk Shot for your physical Poison type moves, depending on how okay you are with missing. And it also gets some interesting supporting moves like Haze. If we ever have a format where Xerneas is really strong again, I could see some people trying out Revavroom because of its quadruple resistance to Fairy and access to the move Haze. Of course, Revavroom will have to contend with Groudon, or Primal Groudon, God forbid, most likely, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Anyway, like I said, Revavroom's not a bad Pokemon. It just feels a little bit awkward. I think Revavroom is a Pokemon that could really shine in a lower powered format, but I imagine it's hard for it to keep up when Pokemon like Incineroar and Urshifu are around. I also appreciate the irony in that I said I could keep up in a lower power format after immediately saying, yeah, it can be used as a Xerneas check, but like, restricted formats, especially restricted formats with Xerneas, are kind of like, sometimes it wraps all the way back around, where your Pokemon isn't chosen because it's generally strong, but because it's good specifically into one specific threat. This is irrelevant, I'm off topic. Anyway, all this to say that Revavroom is not a bad Pokemon by any means, and I could see it being used in the future. It's probably just a Pokemon that needs exactly the right conditions to be strong. The number 6 Pokemon on our list is a Pokemon that also has no results, but is a Pokemon that I'm surprised to see has no results. It's Copperajah. Copperajah on paper is a good Pokemon. It's a pure Steel type, which is one of the best single types that you could have. It has a high base attack stat. It has an ability that can boost its attack stat even further. It has a really high base HP stat that offsets the fact that its defenses are a little bit awkward. And it's really slow, making it a great Trick Room attacker. I'm a little bit surprised it doesn't have any results, because there isn't like a glaring, forgive me, elephant in the room as to why this Pokemon is secretly bad. The thing that I haven't talked about yet is its move pool, which is also really good. It gets high horsepower and superpower to hit opposing Steel type Pokemon who would otherwise resist its Steel type moves. It gets Iron Head, which is boosted by sheer force, its ability. It gets Play Rough as a Fairy type coverage move, which is very unusual. It gets Heat Crash, it gets Stone Edge, it gets Supercell Slam, not that anybody uses this move. It's like, it looks totally good. I don't really understand why this Pokemon has no usage. It actually even got a signature Gigantamax form, which was really good. If you used a Steel type move while you were Gigantamaxed, you would set up the Steel Spike, which is like Stealth Rocks to Steel type. So it would damage Pokemon for a percentage of their health depending on how weak to Steel they were, every single time they switched in. And you could do this while attacking. You didn't have to use like a passive move in order to do it. I really don't understand why this Pokemon has no results. I think the real reason is actually like comparison. Is that the right way to put it? Comparison is the thief of joy. It's not that Copperajah is bad. It's that if you're building a Trick Room team, there are better Pokemon to use inside Trick Room as your dedicated Trick Room sweeper than Copperajah. Teams with Trick Room, and especially teams that are fully dedicated to Trick Room, typically want Pokemon that are going to win the game in the first Trick Room, like before it expires. And in Scarlet and Violet, the most common Pokemon you would use for this are Pokemon like Torkoal and Urshifu and Gallade. Pokemon with either a ton of strong single target burst damage or extremely powerful spread moves. Bonus points of these Pokemon could do something outside of Trick Room, like Torkoal setting the sun up, potentially even using Helping Hand, and Urshifu hitting through Protect or having Sucker Punch with priority. Gallade could even use Wide Guard for a little bit of outside of Trick Room utility. And I guess if there's one area where Copperajah lacks, it's in this out of Trick Room utility. It really wants to be attacking when the dimensions are twisted, but it's pretty vulnerable when they aren't. Add on to this the fact that Copperajah does not get any moves to help set Trick Room up, like Fake Out or Follow Me or Rage Powder. Not that I think it should get these moves. It wouldn't make sense for it to get these moves, of course. But the fact that it doesn't get anything and also doesn't get any priority moves in general that are worth mentioning, or maybe at all. Yeah, at all actually. Makes it a bit awkward to actually use in practice. That being said, this Pokemon has enough going for it that I'm sure it will see some play in the future. Okay, that's the turning point of our list. From here on out, the Pokemon are just straight bad. So far, every Pokemon on the list, I would not go so far as to say that they're actually bad, more that they're just difficult to use or not like well positioned most of the time. From here on out, these are the bad Pokemon. Starting with number 5, Alolan Dugtrio. So I think Alolan Dugtrio is straight garbage. When I initially made this list, I put it at 2nd overall, but after talking a bit with my producer Scarlett, she convinced me that it should be a bit higher up, but I still think it's pretty terrible. Here's the positive thing I can say about Alolan Dugtrio. It's basically like mini Excadrill. Ground and Steel is great typing. No question about that. They have decent synergy together because Steel is resisted by both Steel and Electric, both of which Ground hits for super effective, and Steel is able to hit all the types for neutral damage that Ground hits for not very effective damage. Alolan Dugtrio is also decently fast. It is 10 points slower than regular Dugtrio, but 110 base speed is still nothing to scoff at. Okay, speaking of the speed, let's talk about the other stats. This is ultimately the problem. This is ultimately the nail in the coffin for Alolan Dugtrio. Its stats are abysmal, and it's actually not even its fault. The thing about Alolan Dugtrio is that its base stats are based on regular Dugtrio stats. Like this is a regional variant, and so therefore it's not allowed to deviate in total stats from regular Dugtrio. So it just straight up does not have the stat points to be good. One of the worst HP stats in the game, period. An attack stat that isn't worth writing home about, and defense and special defense stats that would be fine if a Pokemon had HP like Copperajah, but it's Dugtrio. It doesn't. Barring a stupid signature ability, there's almost nothing you could give a Pokemon with these stats that would allow it to be like exceptional or good or even playable most of the time. The typing is good and like in the right formats, maybe having a fast Pokemon with Focus Sash and Ground and Steel typing when Excadrill isn't around, maybe that's worth something. But most of the time, you just like are not going to be able to justify using this Pokemon. The other thing about Alolan Dugtrio is that it doesn't get the same abilities as base Dugtrio. While they both get Sand Force as a hidden ability, which gives it a damage boost in the Sandstorm, if you had Sand on a team and you wanted a Ground and Steel type, you should just use Excadrill, making this awkward. Alolan Dugtrio also gets Sand Veil, which is just like the more gambly version of Sand Force. Now, the third ability of regular Dugtrio is Arena Trap, which is an exceptional ability, and I think that if Alolan Dugtrio got this ability, it would have been higher up the list, if not, not even on it at all. Arena Trap doesn't work on flying type Pokemon or ghost type Pokemon or levitating Pokemon, but trapping your opponent in the field is very good, so it would change the viability a lot, given that Alolan Dugtrio has better typing than base Dugtrio. The issue is that the third ability of Alolan Dugtrio is a signature ability, an ability they created just for Alolan Dugtrio. It's called Tangling Hair, and every time the opponent makes physical contact with Alolan Dugtrio, their speed is lowered by 1 stage. This is a hilarious ability given how Alolan Dugtrio looks, and I do appreciate it from like a lore and world building perspective, but it's also a slap in the face for Alolan Dugtrio because for an ability like this to be good, you need your Pokemon to be taking multiple hits over the course of the battle. This is effectively the Gooey ability that Goodra gets, except it's reskinned. And Goodra's a good ability of Gooey because, yeah, like Goodra's really tanky, so it's feasible that it could take 3 or 4 hits over the course of a battle and have this ability activate multiple times, messing up your opponent's speed. Alolan Dugtrio can take 2 hits at most, and that's only if it's holding the Focus Sash item. Its bulk is so terrible that it can't make use of this ability at all. Basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is that for Alolan Dugtrio to be good, it would need to have something to do offensively because its bulk is so poor that it just can't do anything defensively, and its signature ability being an ability that is best when it's being used defensively just is totally out of whack with how the Pokemon wants to be played. It's a funny Pokemon. I don't think it will ever be good unless they give it another evolution or a mega evolution or something, some real help here. Okay, the 4th worst Steel type Pokemon of all time is Probopass. Probopass is kind of like Bastiodon if it were bad. Both Probopass and Bastiodon are rock and steel type Pokemon. We've talked about why this is bad, and their stats are geared in the exact same way. They're both slow and have low base HP stats, but have super high defense and special defense stats to compensate without really anything to write home about for their attack and special attack stat. By that I mean they're both terrible offensively. Probopass is geared slightly more towards being a special attacker, but like 75 special attack is just pretty terrible, to be honest. Like you cannot rely on this Pokemon to do damage. Here's the issue with Probopass, okay? It's made out of magnets. It's like the magnet Pokemon, right? Its mustache is magnets. In game, to move around, Probopass floats. It levitates. Probopass does not get the levitate ability. If it did, its viability would shoot up so high it wouldn't even be on this list. But it doesn't, meaning it has that quadruple weakness to ground, as well as the quadruple weakness to fighting, as well as the weakness to water. Probopass does have a good ability in Magnet Pull, which can trap opposing steel-type Pokemon on the field. This is kind of like extremely niche Shadow Tag. It also gets Sturdy, which, you know, is always a useful ability to have when you have a ton of big weaknesses. Probopass to me feels like a lot of wasted potential. It gets a number of good supporting moves. Wide Guard is one of the big ones. Taunt, Thunder Wave, Helping Hand, Gravity, Pain Split. We already mentioned Wide Guard. It actually also gets access to Iron Defense and Body Press, just like Bastiodon. So I guess now that I'm looking at it, it could be like just what Bastiodon did, right? Wide Guard, Iron Defense, Body Press, but it is an inferior version of Bastiodon, as Bastiodon has, I think, over 20 points higher in defense and is also 10 points slower, which actually works in its favor because the difference between 30 and 40 base speed is not going to matter outside of Trick Room, but it will matter inside Trick Room. Basically, this is just mini Bastiodon. Probopass is just Bastiodon minus. And I think that's a shame because like these Pokemon are introduced in the same generation. They made two rock and steel type Pokemon that even share an ability and share a typing and have really similar stats and similar move pools, and they added both of them in Generation 4. And I wish they'd done something to give Probopass more of an identity of its own, right? I don't think that giving it Levitate would have made it broken at all. It's still like, it still would be awkward to use. But I think it would have allowed it to have a niche that Bastiodon doesn't. I don't know, I just feel disappointed with Probopass. I think because Nosepass is such a bad Pokemon that like when you have the chance to make it like meaningfully better by giving it an evolution, that's exciting, and then to have it be like, I mean, they did improve Nosepass a lot, right? Probopass is a lot better than Nosepass, but like that's only because Nosepass is so bad in the first place. So I don't know. I don't really have much to say about Probopass. It's just mini Bastiodon. Bastiodon minus. Okay, before we talk about our top three, let's do some honorable mentions. Most steel type Pokemon are actually pretty good. So I don't have that many honorable mentions here. The first is Steelix. Steelix would have been on this list if not for its Mega Evolution, which I actually brought to a tournament and finished top 16 with back in 2018. Is this recorded anywhere? Okay, it's not recorded. I'm pretty sure it was 2018. I'm pretty sure I got top 16 at Dallas Regionals with it. It actually hits harder than you'd expect, and it's really tanky. I also forgot about this, but even before Mega Evolutions, it actually placed 10th place at US Nationals back in 2013. So Steelix is safe. Skarmory is another Pokemon that probably almost definitely would have been on this list, but it got a Mega Evolution and therefore it is safe. Skarmory technically has no recorded results right now, but I think now that its Mega Evolution is out, it will get some eventually. It's not a bad Mega Evolution by any means. The last honorable mention is Alolan Sandslash. Initially, I had it on my list in like 10th or 9th, but then I looked up tournament results and I see that it actually has a number of results in 2017. Its best placement was 8th place at a regional, which is really good. It also got 9th, 15th, and 17th, all used by different players. It was one of the only Slush Rush Pokemon in the format. It may have been the only Slush Rush Pokemon in the format, and being able to outspeed Pokemon like Choice Scarf, Tapu Lele was probably pretty valuable is my guess. And even though the typing is pretty bad and Sandslash is like not anything exceptional on its own, I guess in this format it was actually pretty decent. In theory, it's even better now because this was back before hail was snow, and so like snow is just a better weather condition than hail. So in theory, Alolan Sandslash should be even better in the future if there's ever a format where it can be good. Okay, top 3 time. Coming in at number 3 on the worst steel type Pokemon list is Klinklang. I really like this Pokemon. I don't know why. I know it's stupid, but I really like this one. Klinklang is a pure steel type Pokemon. Klinklang has okay stats. Defense stat is above average. Special defense stat is a little bit middling. Speed stat is average. Attack stat is slightly below average. HP stat is not very good. Overall, it's not great stats is what I will say, but they're not terrible. Like you don't look at these stats and you're like, you could never use this Pokemon in any context. It also has one good ability in Clear Body, preventing the opponent from lowering its stats. This has good synergy with the only real reason players would ever consider Klinklang, which is its signature move, Shift Gear. I said that so confidently. Shift Gear is not a signature move. Okay, but it's not learned by that many Pokemon. It's like Magearna and Toxtricity in Sword and Shield. Anyway, it gets the move Shift Gear. Shift Gear is a really good move. This is like Dragon Dance Plus. It raises the user's attack by 1 stage and speed by 2 stages. On a strong Pokemon, this move would be absurd. On Klinklang, not so much. But it is nice that with Clear Body, you can't lower Klinklang's stats. Okay, Klinklang actually does get a signature move called Gear Grind, which if you know about Iron Crown, is that what it's called? Yeah, Iron Crown. It's basically like the bad version of Tachyon Cutter. It's a physical steel type move that hits twice with each hit having 50 base power. That alone is really good. Like effectively a 100 base power move that hits twice, which is more often than not a positive thing in competitive play. That's really good, except that the move is only 85% accurate for some reason. Even 90% accurate would be like a little bit unfair in my opinion for a move like this. I think 95 is where it would feel like fair. I would be okay with 100. It's not that strong of a move and it's on freaking Klinklang for crying out loud. But no, it's 85% accurate. You could use Fire Blast with 85% accuracy, or you could use Gear Grind from Klinklang. Of course, Klinklang does get access to Iron Head, so it's not like the only steel type move that it can use, but it still feels like wasted potential. Gear Grind is not the only issue with Klinklang's moves though. The other issue is that it doesn't really get any other moves. If you want to use a covers move on Klinklang, your options are Wild Charge. I'm not being funny. I think that's literally it. I'm scrolling through the move pool now. It gets normal moves and Wild Charge from the physical side. You get Impact. Assurance, you can use Assurance. This thing's move pool is like almost as bad as Regielecki's. I don't know why it doesn't get any moves. Like it's not a good Pokemon. You don't need to worry about keeping this Pokemon down. Give it a couple moves, give it high horsepower. I squint, it looks like a horse, right? It gets nothing, literally nothing. I'm not exaggerating. It gets literally nothing. It gets Iron Defense, but no Body Press. I think especially not having a secondary typing here hurts Klinklang because it could then use at least like Protect, Shift Gear, Gear Grind, and then whatever move like is strongest from its other typing. But as a pure steel type, it only has Iron Head and Gear Grind. And frankly, this isn't worth justifying putting Klinklang on your team. I could see it having some use in some, no, I can't see it having use, never mind. It's a Pokemon that I like a lot. It's a Pokemon I never really expect to see in competitive play. It just doesn't have a lot going on. But it does have slightly more going on than the number 2 Pokemon on our list, Stunfisk Galarian form. Before you say anything in the comments, yes, I know this was one of the best Pokemon in Pokemon Go for some time. Not true in the official competitive format. Stunfisk Galar is a bit of a letdown for me personally. I like base Stunfisk. I know it's not a very popular Pokemon, but I think it's really funny. There was a player named Zach back in like 2011 who I think did pretty well with Stunfisk, or maybe it was just like an in-joke in the community, but I remember him actually using Stunfisk at tournaments. When I heard it was getting a Galarian form, I was like curious at the very least. And when I heard the Galarian form was Ground and Steel typing, I was interested because Ground and Steel is good typing. They also gave it a really interesting ability called Mimicry. Mimicry causes Galarian Stunfisk's type to change when the terrain changes. So it becomes electric and electric terrain, psychic and psychic terrain, etc. Fairy and misty terrain, grassy and grassy, whatever. Galarian Stunfisk also has a couple other things going for it. It has good bulk with like totally passable defenses and a high base HP stat. And it also gets a signature move called Snap Trap, which recently received a buff, I'm pretty sure, in Pokemon Champions, excuse me. Snap Trap is a steel type move that does damage over time and inflicts, it's like Fire Spin and Whirlpool if you're familiar with those moves. The issue is that this is kind of all that Galarian Stunfisk can do. It doesn't have very good offensive stats, and it doesn't have many other moves that allow it to like do damage passively over time and actually keep up with the pace of the battle. It actually gets a number of really good coverage moves, funnily enough. Like, of course, it gets Earth Power and Flash Cannon like you'd expect, but it gets Ice Fang, it gets Muddy Water, it gets Scald, it gets Sludge Bomb, it gets Sucker Punch, Pain Split. Like, it gets a number of good moves, but the problem is that it just doesn't have the offenses to actually make use of these moves. Just like many Steel-type Pokemon, Galarian Stunfisk also is weak to both fighting and ground, and although it has the like stats that it isn't like always going to be one-hit KO'd by these moves, in fact, it rarely should be, the fact that it can't do anything back makes it just feel like really awkward and out of place. Galarian Stunfisk basically has the stat spread and the typing for a defensive Pokemon, maybe one that has some team support. Like if it had Tailwind and was faster, if it had Follow Me, if it had Fake Out, if it had Rage Powder, right? All these moves that have generally good utility, it could be a great user of them. But the move pool is really geared towards making it an offensive Pokemon, using moves like Earth Power, Flash Cannon, Scald, Sucker Punch, right? And so it ends up in the spot where it doesn't really have an identity because it gets caught between two different ways of playing. I do like it. I do like that they buff Snap Trap. I think like it could maybe in the right circumstances be used as a really niche pick that has a strength because nobody knows what to expect from it. Maybe when terrains become more present in like the current competitive format, it can have some use going forward because like it is an interesting ability, right? And a trapping Pokemon that can change its type is probably pretty like decent at the very least. But even then, I think it's kind of a far cry for poor Galarian Stunfisk. The one good thing I will say about Galarian Stunfisk is that it isn't the worst steel-type Pokemon. That honor instead goes to Wormadam Trash form. I can say one good thing about Wormadam Trash, which is perhaps ironically, out of all the Wormadams, Wormadam Trash is the best one. It has that Steel and Bug typing, which as we've established is really good. And that's, actually no, I can say one more good thing about Wormadam Trash. It gets the Overcoat ability, which is not wasted. It can allow it to ignore powder and powder moves. This is wasted on Wormadam plant form because it's a grass type, so it already ignores those moves. But yeah, Wormadam Trash can be immune to certain powder moves. Okay, that's the last good thing I can say about Wormadam. It's really slow. It has like passable bulk, but I wouldn't say it's good. I wouldn't even say it's average. It's probably just below average. And its offenses are really bad, like really, really bad. It has no moves that support the team, not even Rage Powder, despite the fact that I think I've raged about this Pokemon at least 3 or 4 separate times. Doesn't learn Tailwind, does learn the move Quiver Dance, which is one of the best setup moves in the entire game. And if it had even like, you know, a decent speed stat, you could justify using it perhaps. Like surely Flashkin and Bug Buzz Quiver Dance Protect is like a good move pool, right? If this Pokemon had like 100 base speed, like surely you could justify using it. But its base speed is 36. It has no speed. There's just nothing for Wormadam to do. And even though this typing is really good, it doesn't have a way to really take advantage of it. Sorry, Wormadam. I honestly feel kind of bad for Wormadam at this point. I think this is a Pokemon that's so bad that they could actually justify giving it an evolution at some point, which is crazy to say because it's already, you know, an interesting Pokemon line. But I think this might be an Applin, Diplin, Hydrapple situation. That's my, I'm coping a little bit, but that's my theory. Anyway, those are all the worst Steel type Pokemon. Let me know which one is your favorite. If you like this video and you want more, you should check out the last video I did in this series, which is what is the worst Ghost type Pokemon.